He raised the broomstick not to punish, but to protect himself. But in 10 seconds, the world decided he was a monster. And the dog? Just another victim. What no one saw was the moment after the silence, the shaking hands, the look in the dog's eyes that mirrored his own fear. This isn't a story about cruelty. It's a story about two broken souls, and what happens when judgment makes you choose between running and healing. A second chance for Boone. The wind moved softly through the tall pines surrounding Cedar Hollow, carrying with it the quiet sounds of a place meant for second chances. The animal shelter sat at the edge of town, nestled between forgotten roads and old railroad tracks, its walls marked not by beauty, but by purpose. Inside those walls, fear and hope often lived side by side. And on one humid Thursday morning, a Labrador named Boone and a man named Eli Morgan, neither of whom wanted to be there, met in a moment that would change everything. Not because of what was done, but because of what came after. The air in Cedar Hollow, Oregon, hung heavy with late summer humidity, the kind that clung to the skin and left everything smelling faintly of wet pine and warm asphalt. Clouds gathered low over the horizon, promising rain by nightfall, and the town's streets were quieter than usual, as if even the wind was holding its breath. At the edge of the town, beyond the old railroad line and a field overgrown with milkweed and wild clover, stood the Cedar Hollow Animal Shelter, squat, concrete structure with flaking beige paint and chain-link fences that rattled in the breeze. Inside Kennel Row B, where the less adoptable dogs were housed, Boone stood pressed into the back corner of his enclosure, his brown eyes wide and fixed on the figure approaching him. Boone was a 3-year-old chocolate Labrador, large for his breed, with a thick, matted coat that hinted at months of neglect before the shelter found him. Scars ran along his left flank, faint but unmistakable, and his ears were notched from old wounds. His eyes, once warm and curious as any lab's, had dulled into something wary and watchful. He did not growl, did not bark. He simply lowered himself, belly to floor, waiting. The man outside the kennel gripped a long-handled broom. His name was Eli Morgan, 42 years old, with a frame more wiry than strong, the kind of build shaped by long years of manual work and short nights of broken sleep. His face was angular, with high cheekbones and a jaw that stayed clenched too often. His short, dark blonde hair was graying at the temples, and deep lines marked the space between his brows like a road carved by years of tension. Once, Eli had worn a police badge until a canine unit incident 3 years ago left him with a fractured leg and a deeper, invisible wound, PTSD that haunted him in the form of barks, lunges, and flashes of teeth. He didn't speak about it. He didn't need to. His reaction to dogs now told its own story. Eli had been working at Cedar Hollow Shelter as a temp for just under 2 weeks. He wasn't hired for animal care, just maintenance and sanitation, but staff shortages had put him in more contact with the dogs than he liked. He hadn't told the shelter about his history. Maybe he should have. Maybe someone would have understood why his hands trembled now as he stepped into Boone's kennel with a bucket of water, a mop, and a broken broom handle for defense. Not to strike, just in case. Boone shifted at the intrusion, and in that split second, when the bucket clanged against the wall and the mop brushed his paw, he startled. The Labrador flinched upright, legs stiff, eyes suddenly round with panic. Eli's heart kicked against his ribs, his vision narrowed, breathing quickened. It wasn't Boone anymore. It was that other dog from 3 years ago, the one that lunged through the patrol car door and snapped down on his thigh. Eli's grip on the broom tightened. "Back," he barked, voice cracking. Boone didn't charge. He backed up only a step, but the tension in his shoulders fed into Eli's panic. In a blur of motion, Eli swung the broom handle, striking Boone along the back. It wasn't hard more instinct than intent, but it was loud, sharp, and final. The Labrador yelped and shrank against the wall, trembling, head down. The camera in the top corner of the kennel, which Eli hadn't noticed, captured every frame. 2 hours later, Tina Morales, the shelter's assistant director, sat in the back office reviewing the surveillance footage after a volunteer reported hearing a dog cry out. Tina was in her mid-30s, Latina, small-framed but fierce. Her black curls were pulled into a tight bun, and her expression rarely showed emotion, but today, it cracked. Her brown eyes narrowed as she watched the video in silence. She paused the screen at the moment of impact. The man was Eli Morgan, and the dog Boone was one of their newest intakes, still under behavioral assessment. The footage didn't show context. It didn't show fear. It only showed a man hitting a dog with a stick. That was enough. Within an hour, the shelter director was called. By end of day, Eli was suspended pending investigation. That evening, a local volunteer named Harper Dean, known for her activism and strong online presence, leaked the video clip trimmed to 10-second Sunto social media with the caption, "Animal abuser caught on tape. Demand justice for Boone." It took less than 6 hours for the video to go viral. By midnight, Eli's name, photo, and employer were circulating online. His inbox was flooded with threats, his voicemail full, "Monster, coward, hope you rot." No one asked why. No one wondered who he was. They didn't see the tremor in his hands, the ghost behind his eyes. And Boone? He was moved to a quarantine kennel, pending evaluation. He didn't eat that night, didn't lift his head, just curled tightly in the back corner, eyes open, waiting. Outside, the rain finally came, washing the streets of Cedar Hollow clean, but doing little to soften what had already been set in motion. Rain had lingered through the night in Cedar Hollow, drumming a low rhythm against the window panes of the shelter's administrative office. Morning arrived muted, blanketed in gray mist, the sun refusing to rise fully through the cloud-thick sky. The town was quiet, but inside the shelter, storm clouds of another kind brewed. Tina Morales, already at her desk before 7 a.m., wore the same black hoodie she'd thrown on the night before, after watching the now viral video for the third time. Her coffee sat untouched, cooling slowly as she scrolled through the endless stream of comments flooding the shelter's Facebook page. She hadn't slept. Neither had most of the staff. She rubbed her temples, exhaling sharply. Public outrage didn't wait for facts. In the dim hallway outside her office, Dr. Maya Sinclair arrived in her usual unhurried manner. She was a woman in her early 50s, tall and poised. Her salt and pepper hair swept into a tight French braid that accentuated her angular cheekbones. A scar ran beneath her left eye, reminder from her time in a combat zone as a veterinary officer with the Army Medical Corps. Maya had joined the shelter 6 months ago, quietly becoming a pillar of professionalism, though her manner could seem cold to those who didn't know her. She preferred action to words, structure to chaos. Maya stepped into Tina's office without knocking. "Where's the full footage?" Tina gestured to the second monitor. "I've queued it." Maya didn't sit. She stood, arms crossed, eyes sharp as she watched the full recording unfold. At the crucial moment when Boone barked and sprang halfway toward Ella, Maya pressed pause. "There." She tapped the screen. "Look at his hands. The man's not attacking. He's reacting." Tina frowned. "He shouldn't have hit the dog." "No," Maya agreed. "But that's not abuse. That's fear." Tina looked up, uncertain. "Are you suggesting we defend him?" "I'm suggesting we don't crucify someone without understanding what made him swing that stick." Meanwhile, across town, Eli Morgan sat alone on the edge of his bathtub, staring at the message on his phone for the 10th time. "You're suspended until further notice. Do not return to the shelter." His jaw was clenched so tightly it ached. His apartment was dim, walls bare except for one faded photo on the fridge of young Eli in uniform, standing beside a sleek black Belgian Malinois, canine unit. His partner back then had been named Diesel. Loyal, deadly. The incident that ended their partnership had also ended Eli's career. He rubbed his left thigh where the old scars pulsed in memory. Diesel hadn't meant to hurt him, but panic didn't care about intent. Neither did the world now. The video was out there. No context, no explanation. Just 10 seconds of him, with a raised broom and a terrified dog. He hadn't told anyone about Diesel, not at the shelter, not even the temp agency. Who would hire a man afraid of dogs for work in an animal shelter? Desperation had made him lie by omission. Now it was unraveling. Back at the shelter, Boone was being prepped for transfer. Nathan Chambers, a soft-spoken kennel tech in his late 20s, wheeled the specialized crate to the rear exit. He had a gentle demeanor, auburn curls under a beanie, and a subtle limp from a motorcycle accident 2 years ago. Nathan didn't say much, but animals responded to him instinctively. He paused in front of Boone's kennel, crouching slowly. "Hey, buddy," he murmured. Boone looked up, his eyes cautious, but not wild. His ears flicked as Nathan unlatched the crate. Boone didn't resist when the leash looped over his neck. He stepped into the crate without fuss, resigned, perhaps, or just exhausted. Tina joined them at the van. "You sure about this?" Maya, already at the driver's seat, nodded. "Hollow Creek has space and staff. He'll be safe there." Cedar Hollow Shelter didn't have the resources for specialized trauma care. Hollow Creek Sanctuary, 2 hours away in the forested outskirts near Lake Merrow, did. It was privately funded, sparsely staffed, but its director, Alexandra King, had built a reputation for rehabilitating dogs deemed unplaceable. It was the best chance Boone had. As the van pulled away, Boone lay curled in the crate, his tail tucked tight, eyes half closed. The hum of the road lulled him into a state not quite sleep but not fully awake, his mind drifting between the walls of the shelter and the raised broomstick, the scent of pine, the echo of barking from long ago. Back in Cedar Hollow, the noise outside the shelter grew. Protesters had begun to arrive, holding signs that read, "Justice for Boone," and "No mercy for animal abusers." Reporters circled. Tina stared at them through the blinds. "You think we'll survive this?" she asked Maya when she returned. Maya, peeling off her raincoat, shrugged. "Depends. Are we here to protect Anna Molasser to feed a narrative?" Later that evening, Boone arrived at Hollow Creek Sanctuary. The property sat at the edge of a dense cedar forest, gated and quiet. The building itself was low-slung and wooden, more cabin than clinic. Alexandra King waited at the door, a woman in her 40s with broad shoulders and sharp eyes, dressed in a flannel shirt and jeans, boots scuffed with mud. Her hair was jet black, cut bluntly to her jawline, and her voice carried calm authority. "What's his name?" she asked as Maya lifted Boone from the crate. "Boone," Alexandra nodded. "Let's see what kind of fire he's got left." As they led Boone into a separate intake wing, the rain began again, soft, steady, washing away the sound of the shelter gates clicking shut behind him. The morning mist lay thick over Hollow Creek Sanctuary, cloaking the pine woods in a ghostly white that blurred edges and softened sound. Dew clung to the tall grass, and the air held the rich scent of cedar and rain-soaked earth. Birds called lazily from distant branches, but inside the sanctuary's intake wing, there was only the quiet shuffle of paws on rubber flooring and the soft scratch of pen against clipboard. Dr. Maya Sinclair stood at the observation window, arms folded across her chest, her gaze fixed on Boone. The Labrador had been with them for 2 full days now. He hadn't eaten since arrival, but he drank water and allowed minimal contact, barely a beginning, but not nothing. Maya had seen worse. She scribbled a few notes in her slim black journal, her pen moving in sharp, precise lines. She was methodical to a fault, driven by systems and protocol, a trait honed in military field hospitals where predictability was a lifeline. Beneath her calm surface lay a deep well of empathy, but she seldom let it show. Emotion, she'd learned, could get in the way of clarity. In the adjacent kennel, Boone lay with his body curled tightly, nose tucked under his tail. His coat had begun to lose its oily sheen, and his ribs showed faint outlines beneath his skin. His breathing was shallow, eyes dull but alert. When Maya entered, she moved slowly, no direct eye contact, no sudden shifts. She placed a bowl of boiled chicken near him, then sat on a low stool several feet away and waited. After 20 minutes, Boone didn't touch the food. But he didn't retreat either. It was a beginning. Meanwhile, 2 hours south in Cedar Hollow, Eli Morgan stood in the parking lot of the town's hardware store, staring into the reflection of a vending machine. His eyes looked sunken, skin pale beneath his short beard. He wore the same faded flannel shirt from 3 days ago, sleeves rolled up to expose a line of scars on his forearm scars that told stories no one asked about. The store manager, a squat man with a perpetually red nose named Chuck Danner, had just informed Eli his position had been paused indefinitely due to public backlash. It wasn't a surprise. Word traveled fast in towns like Cedar Hollow. He walked away without arguing, hands deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched, as if trying to fold himself into nothing. The sidewalk stretched in either direction, but no place felt like it wanted him. His phone buzzed with another unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. That night, Eli didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, lights off, the only illumination coming from the glow of the television playing an old western no one was watching. Boone's face flashed in his memories wide, posture tense. He hadn't meant to hurt him. He just didn't want to be bitten again. Outside Hollow Creek Sanctuary, life was quietly unfolding in ways no adult had noticed. On the edge of the sanctuary's back field, a narrow trail of flattened grass led from the forest edge to the perimeter fence. That trail belonged to Benji Carter, a 10-year-old boy with untamed curls the color of straw and eyes too old for his age. Benji lived with his mother at a temporary housing unit run by the local church, half a mile through the woods. His father had died the previous year in a warehouse fire, and since then, Benji had become a ghost in his own way, speaking only when necessary, scribbling pictures on napkins, walls, and sometimes his arms. It was during one of his silent walks through the trees that he'd stumbled upon the sanctuary's fence. Through the wire mesh, he'd seen the brown dog, the one with eyes like his own. Every day since, he returned. He never brought food, just sat cross-legged near the fence, notebook in his lap, sketching. Boone never approached, but he didn't run either. Sometimes their eyes met. That was enough. Inside, Maya had begun reviewing Boone's intake footage again. She paused at a frame where Boone flinched backward, not from pain, but anticipation, learned fear. She recognized it instantly. "Someone hit this dog a lot more than once," she muttered. Later that afternoon, Maya called in a colleague, Shelley Nguyen, a Vietnamese-American behavioral technician in her early 30s, with a soft voice and an encyclopedic knowledge of canine psychology. Shelley had a calm energy that seemed to smooth the air around her. She was petite, with shoulder-length black hair and a tattoo of a lavender sprig curling up one forearm. Patients responded to her. "People, too. We're dealing with long-term trauma," Maya told her. "Not just recent shelter stress." Shelley crouched near Boone's kennel, observing his body language. His reactions aren't random, they're patterned. He's waiting for punishment. Maya nodded. "He's not dangerous. He's just broken." The next morning, Maya noticed Boone's food bowl had been moved closer to the front of the kennel. Not much, maybe 6 inches, but it meant he'd made the choice to approach it. She marked the progress in her log. Small steps were still steps. That same evening, Benji returned to the fence line with a new drawing. It showed Boone with wings, flying over the trees. The boy folded the page carefully and slipped it through the wire. On the other side, Boone didn't move, but his ears twitched. The first hard frost of autumn settled over Hollow Creek, turning the sanctuary's grassy paths brittle and silver before sunrise. The air had sharpened overnight, and a quiet stillness blanketed the property. Inside her office, Dr. Maya Sinclair sipped lukewarm tea and scrolled through the extended security footage from Cedar Hollow Shelter for the 4th time. Her eyes, sharp and deliberate, caught every twitch, every breath, every ounce of tension between Boone and Eli. It wasn't anger in Eli's motion. It was panic pure, instinctive, unprocessed fear. She recognized the signs. They mirrored her own years ago in a tented field hospital under rocket fire. When the clip ended, she closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair. "It's not abuse," she muttered aloud. "It's a trigger response." Across from her, Alexandra King, the sanctuary's founder and director, raised an eyebrow. Tall, broad-shouldered, and always in dark, earth-toned clothing, Alexandra had the presence of someone who didn't waste words. Her hair was pulled back in a thick braid, and her face aligned but commanding hid most of her emotions behind a steady gaze. "You're convinced?" Alexandra asked. "I've seen real cruelty," Maya said. "This isn't it." Alexandra drummed her fingers on the edge of the desk. "And you want to intervene?" "I want the shelter board to see the full video, not the viral edit. I want them to understand Boone's story and Eli's. And I want Boone to stay here, permanently. He can't go back there." Alexandra nodded once. "Then let's give them a reason they can't ignore." Later that afternoon, Maya sent a formal request to the Cedar Hollow Shelter Board, attaching her analysis, annotated footage, and a behavioral evaluation of Boone. She included a proposal: a public hearing to review Eli's actions in full context, alongside testimony from experts. She knew it was a long shot, but silence had already done too much damage. Meanwhile, in the sanctuary's south yard, Boone was beginning to change. Shelley Nguyen, the behavioral technician with the lavender tattoo, led a series of slow introduction exercises with him. Boone still startled easily, but no longer flinched from her touch. He followed short commands and even wagged his tail a small, hesitant flick when offered treats. Shelley had begun placing visual markers around his Spacesoft-colored cones, cloths, and objects with gentle textures to reorient his sensory triggers. Watching from the tree line, hidden behind thick cedar brush, was Benji Carter. He hadn't missed a day. That afternoon, he arrived with a handful of his newest drawings: Boone lying in a field of stars, Boone with a crown made of branches, Boone curled beside a sleeping child. The boy, silent as ever, slipped them one by one through the fence near the southern perimeter. This time, Shelley noticed. She crouched by the fence, her breath fogging in the cold. "Hey there," she called gently. "That's your art, isn't it?" Benji froze. "You've been coming a while now," she added. "You're the one Boone watches." Slowly, the boy stepped out from behind the tree. His sweater was too big, sleeves frayed, and one of his shoelaces was missing. But his eyes wide and solemn never left Boone, who now sat calmly behind Shelley, watching them both. "My name's Shelley," she said. "What's yours?" Benji didn't answer. Instead, he held out a new sketch Boone with a shield, standing between two shadowy figures. Shelley took it carefully, examining the clean pencil lines and the sharp, deliberate shading. "This is beautiful," she said. "Would you like to meet him?" Benji hesitated, then nodded once. The next day, Shelley arranged a special visitone, supervised by Maya and Alexandra, where Benji could sit just outside Boone's kennel, while Shelley interacted with the dog. No touching, just presence. Boone lay down near the gate. Benji didn't speak, but he smiled for the first time in weeks. At the same time, back in Cedar Hollow, Eli Morgan was doing something he hadn't done in months: writing. He sat in a booth at the local diner, a half-empty cup of coffee at his side, and a weathered notebook open in front of him. The diner owner, Marla Cates, a sturdy woman in her 60s with short silver hair and a loud laugh, didn't kick him out despite the rumors. Marla had grown up with men who came back from wars they never talked about. She knew the look in Eli's eyes. He scribbled down phrases: not intent, reflex, bite memory, I didn't mean to, then crossed them all out. Eventually, he wrote something simpler: I'm not proud of it, but I was scared. That night, Maya received an email from the shelter board. They'd approved her request. The hearing would be held in 10 days. She forwarded the message to Alexandra, then stood by the window of her cabin and watched the frost gather on the porch railing. Somewhere out in the dark, Boone lay sleeping in his kennel, and a boy who didn't speak had begun telling the world a story the world had refused to hear. The late autumn sun filtered softly through the tall evergreens that bordered Hollow Creek Sanctuary, casting long amber streaks across the gravel path. It was the kind of quiet morning that carried the scent of pine sap and cold soil, where each breath hung visibly in the air. Boone's kennel sat in the northeast corner, facing the woods, where the light was gentle and the noise of the facility dimmed by distance. Dr. Maya Sinclair stood beside a one-way glass partition, arms crossed, clipboard tucked under one elbow. Boone was lying on a thick fleece mat near the far wall of his kennel, his head resting over his front paws, gaze calm and steady. His coat, while still patchy in places, had begun to shine with the faint sheen of health. He ate regularly now, responded to his name, and could walk on leash with minimal resistance. Maya had seen the subtle shift, the lowering of his guard, the small gestures of trust, and she knew it was time. She stepped into the lobby and found Eli Morgan already waiting. He looked leaner than she remembered, as though the past few weeks had carved away at him from the inside. His dark jeans hung looser, and his hoodie once a faded gray was now worn nearly threadbare at the cuffs. His posture was taut, like a man braced for impact. Still, his eyes met hers, and she could see the flicker of something unfamiliar behind the exhaustion. "Thanks for coming," she said, motioning for him to follow. "I'm not here to make peace," Eli muttered. "I just need to see him." "I understand," Maya replied. She led him down the side hallway toward the viewing room, a space designed for behavioral observations and slow reintroductions. The room smelled faintly of cedar oil and antiseptic, and the large window offered a clear view into Boone's space. Boone didn't know he was being watched. Maya made sure it stayed that way for now. Eli approached the glass slowly, hands in his pockets, his breath caught when he saw Boone. The Labrador lifted his head, sensing movement beyond the one-way mirror. For a long moment, he stared at the window. Then, without flinching or growling, he lowered his head again, exhaled, and shifted slightly on the mat. Eli's voice, when it came, was nearly a whisper. "He remembers me." Maya nodded. "Yes, but not in the way you fear. Boone associates Thingstone, body stance. Scent but memory is layered for dogs. And he's changed. So have you." Eli didn't answer. He stepped back from the glass, wiping his palms down his jeans. He didn't even flinch. "No," Maya agreed, "because his story didn't end the day that video was recorded, and neither did yours." They stood in silence, the space between them filled with something fragile and undefined. Then Maya turned, reached for a folder on the counter, and handed it to him. "These are his charts, progress notes, his triggers, his improvements. You don't have to read them now, but if you want to understand the whole picture, it's all there." Eli took the folder, nodding silently. Unbeknownst to either of them, through a low gap in the wooden fence outside the sanctuary's west side, Benji Carter crouched with his camera phone tucked close to the chain link boundary. He hadn't meant to follow the man, not really. But he had seen the way Boone looked through the window. Something in the Labrador's posture had changed, and Benji, with the quiet intuition that came from observing the world in silence, had felt it. So he waited. And when Eli's hand pressed briefly to the glass, and Boone lifted his head once more, ears slightly forward, body relaxed, Benji clicked the shutter. Later that afternoon, back at the temporary housing center, Benji uploaded the photo to his anonymous art page. No words. Just a caption in scribbled handwriting beneath the image. Both broken, both healing. Within hours it was shared hundreds of times. Meanwhile, back at the sanctuary, Boone was being introduced to a new activity. Shelley had designed an enrichment exercise using slow-moving obstacle paths and scent-based tracking, a challenge that encouraged mental focus without stress. She watched as Boone navigated the course, nose twitching, tail loosely wagging. Each success was rewarded not with food, but with gentle praise and safe, consistent presence. At the edge of the training field, Alexandra King stood watching, arms folded, her expression unreadable. She spoke to Maya without taking her eyes off the dog. "I assume this means you're going to recommend he stay?" "Permanently, yes," Maya said. "He won't thrive in a traditional home, but here he has a chance." Alexandra glanced toward Boone. "What about the man?" Maya paused. "I think he has a chance too, but it'll take longer." Later that night, in his motel room on the edge of town, Eli flipped through Boone's charts. Page after page of slow recovery, hand-scribbled notes from Shelley and Maya, photos documenting posture shifts, eye contact, tail carriage. By the time he reached the last page, a hand-drawn cartoon of Boone wearing a detective hat, clearly one of Benji's additions, she felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't forgiven himself, but maybe Boone had. The frost was thicker now, painting the sanctuary's fences in delicate crystals and crunching under every step. Hollow Creek sat in the stillness of early winter, where breath became visible and the world felt slower, gentler. Inside the central facility, however, something long dormant was beginning to stir, something like trust, hesitant but real. Dr. Maya Sinclair stood in the training corridor, flipping through the latest behavior reports. Boone's progress was steady, each session documented in neat handwriting by Shelley. Lowered reactivity, growing confidence, response to gentle command tone. The most surprising note came at the bottom of the page, penned just the day before. Boone looked toward the sound of Eli's voice without freezing. Eye contact held for 3 seconds. No growl, no retreat. Maya circled the entry with her pen. It was time. That afternoon, she met Eli in the back paddock, where a low-walled training enclosure had been prepared for carefully controlled desensitization exercises. Eli, bundled in a navy parka too big for him, looked unsure but determined. He hadn't shaved in days, and the hollows under his eyes gave him the look of someone who hadn't quite slept or had dreamt too much. "You said he's doing better?" he asked, voice dry. "Better doesn't mean healed," Maya replied. "But he's choosing curiosity over avoidance. That's a threshold." She handed him a clicker and a soft leather leash knot to use, but to hold, a neutral object Boone could associate with something non-threatening. They walked together to the far end of the paddock where Boone, leashed to Shelley, stood waiting behind a mesh partition. Boone's posture was alert but not stiff. His ears twitched. His tail remained low but uncurled, gently sweeping the ground. As Eli approached within the pre-established safe zone 15 feet, Boone looked up. He didn't back away. He didn't growl. He simply watched. Shelley gave a low verbal cue and knelt beside Boone, offering him a treat and a calm touch behind the ears. Boone accepted both. "This is all we're doing today," Maya said softly. "Just presence, no interaction. Let him recalibrate." Eli nodded, crouching down slowly. You think this really helps? Maya didn't answer at first. She let the quiet hold for a few beats. It's not about forgetting, she finally said. It's about creating new associations, safer ones. Nearby, Benji Carter sat on a stump at the outer fence, not hidden this time. Maya had invited him to observe after he shyly admitted he'd been watching Boone from the tree line for weeks. Today, he wore a thick red hoodie 2 sizes too big and carried a sketch pad tucked under one arm. His face lit up when Boone glanced his way, tail giving one brief wag. The next 3 sessions followed a similar pattern. Eli sat or stood at a safe distance while Shelley worked with Boone inside the enclosure. They read together quiet passages from a dog behavior manual. Maya had loaned Ellie or sometimes just sat in stillness while Boone processed. By the 4th session, Maya introduced movement. Eli stood, shifted positions, walked slowly around the paddock perimeter. Boone followed with his eyes, posture tense but not reactive. And then, without command or coaxing, the Labrador took 1 step forward. Then another. Eli paused, hands frozen mid-step. Boone stopped, too. Watched him. Tensed. Eli lowered his body to a crouch, turned slightly sideways, an instinct he hadn't consciously practiced. It was the universal language of, "I'm not a threat." Boone closed the distance until only a few feet remained between them. His nose twitched, his ears leaned forward, and finally, he stretched his neck forward and sniffed the air near Eli's knee. No flinch. No teeth. Shelley exhaled audibly. Maya scribbled into her notebook with lightning speed. "Should I say something?" Eli whispered. "No," Maya said. "Let him be the one to decide." Boone gave one last look, then turned and trotted back to Shelley's side. But his tail this time had wagged. Not big, not excited, but steady. The moment was enough. Later that evening, at the sanctuary's shared staff cabin, Shelley sat with Maya and Alexandra around a small kitchen table littered with notebooks, coffee mugs, and folders. Alexandra, who rarely praised, lifted her chin in acknowledgement. "You were right," she told Maya. "He's a trigger, yes, but now he's becoming the key." Maya smiled faintly. "Because they're both learning, and because neither of them ran." In a separate corner of the sanctuary, Eli sat in the quiet staff library, a fire crackling low in the hearth. Benji sat cross-legged across from him, sketch pad open, pencil scratching. They didn't talk. Much Benji spoke more with lines and shading than with words, but at some point, the boy passed Eli a new drawing. It was Boone and Eli, standing under a shared tree, both looking up. A sharp wind blew across the Hollow Creek property, rustling the pine boughs like whispered warnings. Winter was creeping in with longer shadows, and a silence that made footsteps sound louder than they were. Inside the records room, tucked behind the sanctuary's medical wing, Dr. Maya Sinclair sat with a stack of intake files spread across the desk like a jigsaw puzzle waiting to be solved. The file on Boone had always felt incomplete. His body told one story: healed over ribs, defensive posture, an almost obsessive reaction to sharp commands, but the paperwork from Cedar Hollow had been vague. Found on private property. No microchip. Unclaimed. The few behavioral notes were general, the history sparse. Maya had requested records from the local animal control office, and now, as she sifted through the pages freshly faxed from a nearby jurisdiction, she saw the first hint of truth. A small handwritten note stood out. Prior reports of aggressive behavior. Subject was reportedly used as deterrent on rural compound, multiple noise complaints, signs of physical abuse. Owner cited, but not charged. Maya's stomach clenched. She continued reading references to a man named Ronnie Calhoun, mid-50s, stocky, with a history of minor offenses including trespassing, animal noise violations, and suspected underground training. No formal charges stuck, but the pieces lined up. Calhoun had run a makeshift salvage business from his property, and according to a former neighbor's complaint, kept Big Brown Dog chained near the gate and shouted at it a lot. Maya leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. She could almost see it, Boone tethered to a chain, bark trained into him like muscle memory, obedience enforced through punishment. His reactions now weren't signs of aggression. They were relics of a survival system burned into his brain. Later that day, Maya asked Eli to meet her in the old log-walled staff cabin, a quieter space used for staff check-ins and private consults. A small fire burned in the stove, casting flickering light across the worn wooden floorboards. Eli arrived looking less guarded than usual. The tension in his shoulders had eased over the last week, though he still moved with the caution of someone not used to being welcome. He sat across from Maya, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug filled with black coffee. "I found something," Maya said gently. "Boone didn't come from nowhere." Eli watched her over the rim of his mug. His prior owner used him as a guard, likely isolated him, maybe beat him for not reacting fast enough. He was trained to respond with fear. Eli didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he placed the mug down carefully. "That's what they did to Diesel, too." Maya's eyes narrowed. "Diesel?" "My 9 partner," Eli said. His voice was low, steady. He wasn't like that at first, but after a new handler rotated in, the training got harsher. Shock collars. Bite drills pushed too far. Diesel stopped trusting people. Then one day, he lunged during a patrol, missed the suspect. "Got me." He rubbed a hand down his thigh. "They called it an unfortunate accident. No one said what happened before Thathow. We trained him to be scared all the time. I got a medical discharge. Diesel got reassigned. Don't even know where he ended up." Maya nodded slowly. "So when Boone jumped at you?" "It was all there again," Eli finished. "The bark, the eyes. I didn't see Boone. I saw Diesel." The fire crackled between them, soft and insistent. "You weren't reacting to Boone," Maya said quietly. "You were reliving something your body never got to process." Eli leaned forward, elbows on knees, and he was reacting to something that had already broken him. For the first time, Maya saw something new in Eli's eyes: grief. Yes, but also recognition. They were no longer just trying to rehabilitate a dog. They were walking 2 paths that had always been parallel, finally intersecting. Outside the cabin, Benji Carter was sitting cross-legged in the gravel, a blanket around his shoulders and his sketch pad on his knees. He had started coming more often, now with permission, and the sanctuary staff had grown used to the silent boy with the big eyes and quick hands. Today, he was drawing Boone curled under a tree, his body relaxed, head resting beside an outstretched human hand. It was a softer image than any he'd drawn before. That evening, Maya documented her findings in Boone's medical file. She included her behavioral analysis and detailed trauma notes, marking the significance of Boone's past on his current treatment plan. It wasn't just about healing him anymore. It was about understanding what had made him hurt in the first place. The next morning, Shelley brought Boone into the main paddock. Boone walked beside her calmly, head up, tail loose, no leash pulling. Across the yard, Eli stood waiting. When Boone spotted him, he hesitated then, slowly, continued forward. No command, no prompt. Just choice. Boone stopped a few feet away, looked up at Eli, and sat. The wind whispered through the trees above them. The silence between man and dog was no longer heavy, it was sacred. Morning broke pale and cold over Hollow Creek Sanctuary, the sky painted with faint streaks of gold behind layers of frosted clouds. The first snowfall had arrived overnight, a light dusting that turned the dirt trails into quiet pathways of powder. It softened the world in a way that felt almost symbolic. Even the air had hushed itself. In that silence, a new chapter was about to begin. In the southeast paddock, Maya Sinclair stood holding a handheld camcorder, the red light blinking quietly as it recorded. Her breath misted in front of her face, her gloved hands steady on the grip. Across the field, Boone stood beside Eli Morgan, not just near him, but beside him, connected by a leash held gently in Eli's hand. Boone's body was relaxed, his ears perked slightly forward. His tail didn't wag, but it didn't tuck either. The leash, a soft nylon one Shelley had specially selected for this moment, hung with just the slightest tension, like a thread between two beings, still learning how not to break it. Eli was dressed in a worn winter coat and a knit cap pulled low over his brow, his shoulders squared with the kind of cautious hope that comes from wanting not to mess up something fragile. His boots made faint prints in the snow as he began walking. Boone followed. At first, his gait was tentative, but after a few paces, he matched Eli's rhythm. No lunging, no hesitation, no need for command. Just presence, just pace. Maya adjusted the focus, zooming in slightly, her eyes tracking each step. It wasn't a perfect walk. Boone stopped once when a squirrel darted nearby. He glanced nervously when Eli brushed his coat to one side, but he didn't flee, he didn't freeze. And each time, he chose to return to Eli's side. Shelley watched from a nearby bench, notebook in hand. "That's not training," she murmured aloud. "That's choice." Maya nodded without lowering the camera. "Exactly." Back in the main building, Alexandra King, the founder of Hollow Creek, was reviewing an email invitation for the upcoming National Conference on Companion Animal Behavioral Rehabilitation. Tall and composed in her usual flannel and hiking boots, she sat at her desk beneath a wall of framed newspaper clippings and faded photographs of dogs who'd passed through the sanctuary. The email came from Dr. Aaron Blakely, a colleague who respected Alexandra's work enough to offer her a keynote slot. She didn't usually say yes to speaking engagements, she wasn't built for spotlights, but this time was different. She tapped a reply. "I have a case we'd like to present. Human-animal co-recovery. Real data. Real results. You'll want to see this." Across the sanctuary, in the classroom-turned-lounge, Benji Carter stood at the doorway, clutching a permission slip in one hand and a small box wrapped in recycled newspaper in the other. He'd been invited officially this time by Maya and Alexandra to visit Boone during supervised play sessions. Today was his first real visit, and the boy had dressed up in his best, a thick red sweater with a stitched fox on the front and a wool beanie too big for his head. "Ready, Benji?" Shelley asked, crouching down to his level. He nodded quickly, then offered her the box. Inside was a handmade Calera braided cord with colors mimicking the forest, and a wooden tag shaped like a leaf. Shelley opened it slowly, her smile soft. "For Boone?" Benji nodded again, this time with a shy grin. Out in the playfield, Boone had just finished his walk with Eli and was now resting beside a low log near the open area. When Benji approached, Boone's head lifted, but there was no alarm in his eyes. Only curiosity. Benji sat down cross-legged a few feet away and waited. After a few minutes, Boone stood and padded forward. He sniffed Benji's sleeve, then rested his chin briefly on the boy's knee. Benji didn't move. He just beamed. From the observation window, Maya turned to Eli. "He never does that," she said. Eli watched the moment with a quiet sort of reverence. It's like he knows. Later that evening, Maya edited the footage from Boone's walk with Eli and compiled a brief presentation titled Cross-Species Trauma Recovery, the Boone-Eli Protocol. She submitted it to the national conference with Alexandra's endorsement. The next morning, Alexandra called her into the office. "You've got a reply already," she said, holding up her phone. "They want you to present, And they want Eli there too. Maya blinked. Me? Present? Why not? Alexandra said. You're the one who made this possible. And Eli? Alexandra leaned back in her chair. He lived it. The sky over Cedar Hollow was a pale slate, brushed with the thinnest hints of gold where the sun tried to break through. The wind carried a brittle chill, whistling through bare tree branches as the white van from Hollow Creek pulled into the gravel lot of the Cedar Hollow Animal Shelter. The place looked the same as it had months ago, peeling paint, rusted signage, chain-link fences rattling faintly, but for Boone and Eli, everything felt different now. Dr. Maya Sinclair stepped out first, bundled in a forest green coat, her hair pulled back beneath a wool cap. She scanned the perimeter calmly, then opened the van door for Boone. The chocolate Labrador stepped down onto the cold pavement with quiet grace. His posture was upright, tail neutral, gaze steady. At his side, Eli Morgan followed with one hand loosely holding Boone's leash. He wore a dark fleece jacket and jeans, his movements steady, his breathing slow. There was a stillness to him now, not emptiness, but a quiet readiness. Inside the lobby, Laura Keene, the new shelter director, waited with hands folded. She was tall, mid-40s, African-American, with a composed demeanor and strong, even voice. Her years in public shelter administration had made her a firm believer in process and people, but she also knew when both had failed. She greeted them personally. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It means more than I can say." "Thanks for inviting us back," Maya replied, "and for being willing to face this head on." The hall leading to the kennels seemed longer than Eli remembered. The fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, and the scent of antiseptic was the same. Boone's nails clicked softly on the floor, but he didn't pull. He walked beside Eli in perfect sync. They reached the last kennel on the left, the one from the video, the one from the memory. Boone paused. Eli did too. The air held a different kind of weight here. Eli crouched beside Boone, brushing his gloved fingers over the leash. Boone looked at him, then at the kennel, then back again. Eli let out a breath. It's just a space now. Boone slowly sat beside him, not behind, not apart, beside. From a short distance behind them, a group of shelter staff and volunteers, those who had stayed through the storm of controversy, and a few new faces stood in respectful silence. Some held clipboards. Others held coffee. But none spoke. The stillness was reverent. Laura stepped forward slowly. "Mr. Morgan," she said gently, "I wasn't part of the leadership team when this happened, but I've reviewed every report, every video, every piece of what was released and what wasn't." Eli stood, his hand still resting on Boone's back. "We failed you," Laura continued. "We failed Boone too. We allowed a 10-second clip to speak louder than a history of service or a story of trauma. We didn't ask the right questions. For that, I want to offer a formal apology from the shelter, and from me." Eli nodded slowly. "It wasn't just the shelter," he said, his voice low but clear. "But it started here, and I appreciate you saying it." Laura gestured toward a nearby meeting room. "There's one more thing. I'd like to show you what we've been building because of your story." Inside the room, a bulletin board displayed newly developed materials, laminated sheets on trauma, informed care, diagrams of canine fear responses, new volunteer handbooks with highlighted safety protocols, and in the center, a training outline titled Rehabilitation Through Empathy, Understanding the Human-Animal Bond. At the bottom of the first page, Lead Instructor, Eli Morgan, pending acceptance. Laura turned to him. "We'd like to invite you to return not as staff, but as a consultant trainer. You understand fear-based response in a way few people can. You've lived it, and so has Boone. That makes you both valuable teachers." Eli blinked, stunned. Maya smiled from the corner. "I may have recommended you." Before he could answer, Boone nudged his leg gently, as if reminding him, "You're not who you were when you left, and neither am I." Eli took a breath. What would I be teaching? Laura handed him a sample module: how to listen better, how to see beyond a reaction, and how to not let a single moment define an entire life. The offer wasn't just a job, it was a restoration. Later that day, in the small visitor garden behind the shelter, Benji Carter arrived with his mother, Angela Carter, a kind-faced woman in her late 30s, with a long beige coat and tired eyes that hinted at years of doing too much with too little. Angela had initially been wary about the sanctuary staff inviting her son into a space once tied to controversy. But she had watched Benji change over the last month lighter, more open, no longer drawing only wolves and barbed fences. When Boone spotted Benji, his tail wagged. Not the cautious flick of early days, a full, slow wag that ended with him lying down at the boy's feet. Benji sat beside him and pulled a small piece of folded paper from his coat. It was a new drawing Boone and Eli in front of the kennel gate. This time, the gate was open and light streamed through. The warm breeze of early spring swept gently across the fields of Hollow Creek Sanctuary, brushing over the budding wildflowers and coaxing life back into the pine-covered hills. The frost was long gone, and in its place came the smell of earth, new grass, and the quiet sounds of recovery and motion. It had been 6 months since Eli and Boone stood before the old gate at Cedar Hollow, and much had changed since then, not just in the world around them, but within them. Eli Morgan now stood in the training barn, a clipboard in hand and a whistle slung loosely around his neck. His jeans were faded, his sleeves rolled up over forearms marked with scars and sun. His posture was different, now less guarded, more grounded. He moved through the space with calm authority, not the stiffness of fear, but the awareness of someone who had fought to earn his place and stayed. Across the room, Boone trotted at a steady pace beside Harper Lee, a 10-year-old girl with thick glasses, a lopsided braid, and a diagnosis of selective mutism. She had arrived at the sanctuary 2 months ago with her grandmother, after a traumatic incident left her withdrawn and distrustful of people. Her file had noted difficulty in communication, aversion to loud noises, and a reluctance to make eye contact. But today, she walked with Boone by her side, her hand gently brushing against his fur with every step. Boone, now a full-time therapy support dog at Hollow Creek, wore a custom-made harness with a patch that read, "Calm is contagious." His coat gleamed in the morning light, and his eyes had regained the softness that was once only hinted at. He no longer flinched at sudden movements. He watched. He waited. He guided. Maya Sinclair stood in the observation loft above, watching the session unfold. She had transitioned into a part-time clinical supervisor role, preferring to spend her days writing and mentoring rather than in constant sessions. She wore a crisp gray vest over a white blouse, her dark hair now streaked more with silver than before. Her eyes, though tired, were bright with quiet pride. "Who would have thought," she murmured aloud, "he'd become the one doing the teaching?" Shelley Nguyen, now head of canine behavioral therapy at the sanctuary, stepped beside her with a mug of tea. "Boone or Eli?" Maya gave a small smirk. "Both." That afternoon, a film crew arrived from a regional PBS affiliate. They had been granted access to the sanctuary for a feature piece titled "Second Chances: The Story of Boone and Eli." The journalist leading the story was Devin Marks, a well-dressed man in his mid-30s with sandy hair, an affable smile, and the subtle energy of someone used to tiptoeing into people's pain for a living. He wasn't flashy, but he was careful, exactly the kind of voice this story needed. He interviewed Maya first in her office, surrounded by books and old military commendations. Then Shelley, near the training arena. Finally, he sat with Eli on the front porch of the cabin overlooking the pastures. "How do you describe what this place gave you?" Devin asked, Mike clipped to Eli's collar. Eli looked out over the fields, watching Boone play tug-of-war with Harper and another child from the nearby school. His voice was low but steady. "It gave me a place to stop running," he said. "It gave me someone to trust me before I trusted myself." Devin leaned forward. "And Boone?" Eli smiled slightly. "He taught me how to stay." The final clip of the segment aired 3 weeks later. It showed Boone walking beside Harper, a gentle piano score beneath the narration, and ended with Eli speaking at a training seminar for regional shelter volunteers. He stood at a podium, Boone lying calmly at his feet, and delivered the words that had come to define everything that followed. Sometimes, healing begins not with forgiveness, but with someone who dares to stay. The story went viral not in the explosive, outraged way of before, but in quiet waves of shared hope and empathy. Comments flooded in. "This gave me hope for my own rescue dog. I wish I'd had a mentor like Eli when I worked with trauma cases. Boone, you are a hero." Back at the sanctuary, Benji Carter watched the segment from the lounge room, now taller, more expressive, and more comfortable around people than he'd ever been. He wore a Hollow Creek Junior Volunteer badge on his vest and sat cross-legged on the floor with Boone's head resting on his lap. Angela Carter, his mother, stood nearby talking with Alexandra King, who had restructured the sanctuary's outreach program to include more youth-based mentorship. "He's different now," Angela said, watching her son with quiet awe. "Boone didn't just help him, he brought him back." Alexandra nodded. "That's what real teachers do. They don't change you with force. They show you what's possible when you're seen." Later that evening, the sanctuary settled into its usual rhythm, the distant barks of new arrivals, the soft hum of heaters, the wind through the pine trees. In cabin 3, Eli sat writing training notes for the next volunteer session. Boone curled at his feet, occasionally thumping his tail against the floor. When Eli finished, he looked down at Boone. "You ready for tomorrow, old man?" Boone lifted his head, blinked once, and gently rested it on Eli's boot. And in that small moment, surrounded by silence and light and 6 months of hard-won trust, it was clear. They had become the teachers they once needed.